Greetings, bald travelers. It's been about a year since we've done our last update, and so we thought we'd just give you an update as to where we currently are, what we're currently doing, what our plans are, and what's happened in the last year since we did our last update. So our last update, we were in our trailer in New Mexico, and we had just started on our journey across the U.S. to the East Coast. It's hard to believe that it's already been a year since we've sold our house and moved to the East Coast and decided to try this traveling thing for an entire year. Spoiler alert, we didn't last a year. So kind of where we are now is we live just outside of Orlando, Florida, a town called Celebration. I've shot some videos of the area that have been up on the channel, so you've got an idea of what Celebration looks like. And so we live here in Celebration in a brand new apartment complex, and we've been kind of spending our time in and around the Orlando area, and then also saving as much money as possible as we prepare to go to Portugal.
Right. We spent our money on a one-bedroom apartment to keep the costs down, and also we went from that really large truck to a very small car. That we have one car. We've never had one car in our relationship ever. So that's been interesting. But right now we have a little Toyota Yaris, and it does everything we need it to do. So that's one way that we look to kind of get our costs down.
So there were a few things that kind of caused us to stop traveling. One of them was we decided to move the timeline up for when we move to Europe full-time, and wanted to save as much money as possible, which meant I decided to go back to work. And since we're on limited internet as it was in the trailer, it was going to be really hard for both of us to be working, me full-time, Sue still part-time, and do that. So we decided, let's start looking for a place to live and move from there. So we did make it to my brother's in Tennessee, and then we made it to Sue's family in Virginia, and actually started making our way south. And around Thanksgiving of last year was when we decided to actually make the decision to stop and kind of focus on earning as much money as possible so that we can move to Portugal as soon as possible. So we did stop RVing here in Florida, and we don't regret what we did in RVing. There are multiple reasons why we did stop RVing. One of the main reasons was, it was just getting so hard doing the planning. Having to plan like 6 months, 12 months out in some situations really was becoming a pain for us, and not kind of the way we wanted to travel around the U.S. The other part was the prices for diesel had started to go up, and our whole budget for how much we were going to spend started to go up. And as you've seen from some of the videos we did post, we did have some issues around the trailer itself. We got worked through most of those.
Yeah, we totally worked through those, and honestly that's the way I learn best, is to break everything and then fix it, which we broke a lot of stuff, but now I'm actually quite confident in being able to, live in an RV. But that even more so, it just was taking, again, it was more time fixing your RV up and packing up and moving. If we could have slowed down a bit, it might would have helped, but we were spending the vast majority of our time when I wasn't working either packing up or fixing something.
And I mean, right now we were at like the 1 week stage, and our current plan had taken us out to Arizona to be in March of 2022, to be in Arizona was what our original plan was. And then from there we were going to go up the West Coast and then come down through like some of the national parks. And we were looking at doing like 2 or 3 week stints during that time. But to do that in some of the places, like a lot of the state parks, it's a max of 2 weeks before you have to either vacate or move to a different spot. And that is, again, a lot of work. So that means we're staying at commercial RV parks, and commercial RV parks were 2 to 3 times as expensive as a state park. So, that affects the budget that we were working against, since the budget assumed that we would be somewhere in that state park, or slightly higher level for the majority of the time. And then the fuel prices did not help, and I was not looking forward to fuel prices in California, because even here in Florida, when we decided to stop, fuel was almost $4 a gallon for diesel, and it's still like $4.50 a gallon for diesel here, whereas gasoline prices are in the low threes right now.
It was just crazy. But I mean, we try to always look forward. So
Yes.
again, I don't regret anything
Yes.
we did. Who has the opportunity to go and live in an RV? People talk about it, but we did it. So it was an experience I wouldn't give up for anything. Dave and I lived
Yes,
in
an RV.
An RV with our dog in a very small contained area, and we did not kill each other. So, it was a really great experience.
And, before we kind of go on and talk about some of the other things about the RV and some of our future thoughts on that, I just want to remind everybody to subscribe and like this video. Mm-hmm. It really helps us out and lets us know that, what we're doing reaches out to you and you find it interesting. Some of the other things that I think I've determined at least, and I think you'd be in agreement, is we're not ruling out RVing in the future. We may, in Europe, depending on where we are, rent an RV for a week or so or 2 weeks and just go somewhere on a rental.
We could talk about it as a vacation instead of a lifestyle.
Yes. Even when we move to Europe, we will be living somewhere. We will have a home base. Our thoughts on that are mainly kind of right now revolving around someplace where we want to live, but someplace where we could Airbnb it out, depending on the climate in Europe, and that's something we're looking at also.
Yeah.
The climate in Europe is changing. So in Portugal right now, a lot of the rentals are short-term rentals, Airbnb style or VRBO style rentals. So it's harder finding like a long-term apartment you need for a residential visa. That's probably going to flip here in the next year or so, where the tax incentives kind of even out, so it's better for both. But we've been hearing rumblings that it's going to be like the building has to be kind of entirely short-term rentals and not just like normal rentals. So,
and again, in Portugal, they're seeing this. It's just driving prices of renting way up. People are, during the summers, the rent just goes sky high, and you literally cannot find long-term rentals at all, because it just is more cost effective for them to rent it out only in the summer and let it sit empty for the winter. They still make more money, and it's a better tax incentive. So Portugal's definitely, I think they're in the works of kind of fixing that a bit, but it's going to take a while. Like with any country, change at that level takes time.
Kind of the other thing we're looking at in Portugal right now is, do we need a vehicle? Our last trip we didn't use a vehicle. We didn't really need a vehicle, but this next trip, at least for some of the cities we're going to, we'll probably need to rent a vehicle, and that's going to also impact kind of where we end up, I think, to some degree in Portugal, because vehicles in Portugal can get expensive and are expensive. There's taxes when you buy a vehicle, either new or used, and then the fuel prices are like $7 to $8 a gallon easily for just gasoline for a vehicle. And yes, they're pushing electric vehicles, but the infrastructure just isn't there yet. And buying a used electric vehicle is a little bit harder in Portugal or in Europe in general, because there just isn't that market for them. We're starting to prep and prepare for what it's going to mean to go for us to Portugal full time. We're looking at what the visas are. Most likely almost definitely I'll be going on the D7 visa, which is the investor visa. And so we've been getting our investments set up to be able to support that as much as possible. And Sue, we're kind of back and forth on whether she's going to go on the D3 visa, which is the highly experienced, or what's known as a technical visa for somebody who has a background in a high demand position, or if she's going to also go D7 with me. Both are possible. It just really comes down to if we can make it so that she can still work for her company, which is based out of Europe as it is, whether she can still work for them part-time, and we can continue to have for at least another year or two that income coming in. One thing we can always do is switch that over to a D7 later on as we're going through, and we've already got the residency stuff set up. We can switch how she maintains her residency over there as needed.
Yeah, our goal, whether I go over with a D3 or not, is to have enough income that we don't have to work. But it would be nice, again, to have that cushion for about 5 years until our retirements really start rolling a little bit more. So I've been having some very open conversations with my place of employment, and they're investigating the different options and what it would mean for them. So that's one reason we've kind of, pushed out our date a little bit, and it's just going to take some time to really get those details sorted out.
And part of what we've been doing is, we've been doing everything we need to do for moving over there in April and May in May and June of this year. You've already seen the videos I've published of us in Portugal. So we did our initial trip to Portugal. We stayed a little bit in Lisbon, and then we really focused on the Algarve, or the southern region, where a lot of the retirees go. And we found some nice areas there that we could live in if we wanted to. It's a little bit more expensive than we think we probably want to start out on. So we are going back in January of this year, in about 3 months, for a few reasons. One, we want to go in the winter to see what it's like in the winter in there, because we will be spending 5 years of our life for sure in Portugal for the majority of the time, because the D7 visa, even the D3 visa, requires us to be there for about 9 to 10 months of the year for each of those 5 years.
Right, and when he says, this year, he's talking January 2023. I know we're getting into multiple years, and things might get a little confusing, but yeah, January of 2023 is when we're looking to take our second trip to Portugal and do a little bit more look a little further north. Prices are a little lower there. I'm not quite as thrilled because I know the weather is a little colder that way, but it's something I need to see if it's something I can do, at least for the short term.
And when she mentions colder weather, if you look at the weather map in winter, the lows should be in the 40s with a few days in the 30s, and the highs should be in the 50s or the 60s, which is very similar to what we have here in Florida, or at least what we experienced last year in Florida.
We'll see. I'm skeptical. I think it's going to be more like I'm used to in Virginia, which is, again, something I moved away from. I'm not looking to move back for that, but again, for short term, for a shorter number of years, I can handle it.
So for the next year, we're going to continue to shore up our investments, save as much money as we can here, make the last few trips that we want to make here in the U.S. We still want to get up to Forks, Oregon, Forks, Washington, and see where the Twilight movies were filmed.
Yeah.
We're going to make a couple more trips back to see family before we move, and to see our friends in Arizona.
Yep.
And then kind of as we move on, we will be preparing everything that we need for our visa, and also getting prepared to actually move over, doing yet another downsizing of the few remaining items that we have. We've been trying really hard not to accumulate too much stuff in this apartment, but there are still things we're not going to move over to Portugal, like any of our electronics that even we had in the trailer, like kitchen electronics and stuff like that, we're not going to move over. Mainly it's just going to be phones and computers and stuff like that, electrical wise. And the rest of it will probably just be the sentimental stuff, like the wall of toys and stuff that we have behind us, and our Harry Potter wall that's in another area of our apartment. And so that kind of brings us to the next thing. Our time frame we're looking right now is probably March of 2024 when we would move over. We probably don't want to push it much past that for tax reasons in Portugal. There are some tax advantage programs that we're looking to use that are like 7 years or 10 years, but they start technically at the beginning of the year. So if you moved over in November of a year, your first year eligibility would be the entire first year. And as we kind of go along, we will of course video our decisions and kind of discussions like we did when we were doing the preparing to go full-time RVing. So we will be doing the preparing to move to another country full-time series as we get a little bit more in depth into it. Kind of go over how we're applying for our visas and the steps we're doing that. We're also looking at the possibility of doing an ebook to help with that, and possibly like a checklist app you could have on your phone or on a website you can go to and say, okay, yeah, I'm moving to this, I want to move to this country. What are my options? What are my visa options? And okay, this visa I think is the one I want to pursue. What do I need to do to be able to secure that visa? We're looking at doing it specifically for Portugal as we investigate all of the visas that are possible, including the golden visa. And then also, in the future, we've talked about doing it for other countries also. Some of the things we've already done to kind of prepare for this, because we knew this was coming, was number one, we set up to get our Portuguese tax ID, which is known as the NIF, and we used a service in Portugal that was recommended to do that. And then second to that, once we had secured that, kind of the harder thing, and it's getting harder for various reasons, but we also now have a bank account in Portugal that we have put pretty much what we would need to qualify for the visa for the first year is already sitting in that bank account and prepped so that we could also use it while we're going over, and we wanted to just make sure that that money was available and it wasn't like in our local bank account, especially with the way that here in September, October that the financial markets have been going with the inflation and the possible recession. We wanted to make sure that we had enough money kind of socked away, and then we'll have we'll continue to structure our investments so that we have money coming in every month that we can show that meets the minimum requirements. And we already have that, but we want to build a bigger nest egg so again we can live off of that and not necessarily have to work on it and have options for what visa we decide to use.
Yeah, the way the visa works, you have to build a story. You have to convince someone, and honestly it depends on what person you get, what they're going to pass and not pass. But you have to have a story to show that you can support yourself in Portugal. So that's what we're working on, is just to make that as easy as possible for whoever's going to review our file. So, there's plenty of Facebook groups out there and details online, but it's very confusing in a lot of ways, and it changes all the time. So it's something you have to keep on top of.
Yeah, and kind of the last thing to bring up was, for those of you who haven't heard or known, as we kind of stated in our past videos, and you heard, in the background a lot of those videos, we had a Greyhound, and our life for traveling was kind of revolved around that. The trailer we got was kind of based on what would suit, our Greyhound and also us, but a lot of it was for what would suit our Greyhound. And a lot of the planning we had initially done for going over to Portugal revolved around how would we move Nell over to Portugal, and we were planning on that. We had discussions of, do we wait a little bit and wait for her to pass or something, or do we plan? And we had decided that we were going to plan, we're going to bring her with us and give her the best life that we could in Portugal. Unfortunately, Labor Day here of 2022, we had went out to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal the first weekend, and she had been acting kind of off the last couple of days. She kind of slowed down in eating and stuff, but that was not unusual for her.
She was a weird dog.
But when we came back, one thing, whenever we came back to the apartment, she would always run out of wherever she was sleeping or hiding and greet us at the door and tell us that she missed us. And when we came back from that Halloween Horror Nights on Sunday, right before Labor Day, she didn't come out and greet us. So we knew something was wrong. So one thing I did is I took her for a walk, thinking maybe she needed to go to the bathroom because we were gone for a few hours and stuff, and thinking maybe she had ate something or something like that. And she was okay for most of the walk, but I almost had to carry her back at the end of the walk. And we had debated going back and forth on what we were going to do, where we were going to take her to the emergency vet. I mean, it was late at night.
I run anxious, so I was definitely proponent of, I don't care, I'll pay the money, let's take her, just for
our peace of mind.
Our peace of mind, if nothing else. And when we were kind of going over things, there was a point where I was feeling on her and found a place that was tender. Her whole abdomen actually was tender to the touch, and that was it.
Yep.
Once we knew for sure she was in pain, we packed her up in the car and took her immediately to the emergency vet.
So we took her to the emergency vet, thinking, you know, it wasn't anything major. She had done this a couple other times, and we ended up taking her to the emergency vet when we were in Phoenix. So we weren't really, or at least I wasn't thinking it was going to be anything major. But unfortunately, when we got there, they took some X-rays and they found a massive lump in her stomach. And I didn't realize that this is something common for older greyhounds, as they develop very large cancerous.
They're more known for bone cancer, you know, osteosarcoma, but this also happens as well.
But she ended up where, without doing exploratory surgery, we were like 90% confident she had a large cyst on her spleen, or tumor on her spleen, which most likely was cancerous. And if we would have went in with the surgery, there was a very good chance that it would have ruptured and there wouldn't have been anything they could do about it. And even if they were successful, it was only a couple more years that she would have been with us. And the quality of life was always a question, and we were concerned about the healing with her anxiety. You know, even if she survived, we were concerned of how well she would heal. So, you know, unfortunately, we did lose Nell, and it kind of changed the dynamic of what our plans are, because a lot of our plans were revolving around how do we get an 50 to 70 pound greyhound to Europe. And, you know, what's the correct way of doing that? What's the best way of doing that?
Right.
And we're also pet people. So we've been married for 17 years. We've had pets for 20 years together, and we both had pets beforehand. So we've, you know, there's only been probably about 4 or 5 years where one of us didn't have a pet, and so we realized that. So, but we're also not going to, at this point, get a new pet, even though we both kind of want to. I think we're going to wait until we get over to Portugal just to make that logistics a little bit easier, because we could do it, but we would have to get like a way smaller pet in at this time, just to make it easier for us logistics wise. So I think we're going to wait until we get over there, and then, you know, we'll introduce you to our new pet in about a year and a half when we're over there and we've settled in, and we've got that done. But we just kind of wanted to let you know that it is kind of affecting us and kind of how we plan going forward. So that kind of wraps up where we are and what we've been doing. And I just want to wrap this up and finally say, remember, my friends, travel baldly and be safe.